Hey, welcome everyone. We're gonna just talk today about micronutrients and especially minerals. We're gonna be focusing on the minerals because that's what I recently specialized in more, and the minerals themselves are pretty important for the entire physiological processes of the body as well. And we'll begin with what are the micronutrients itself. Like you can change maybe to the bigger view of the slide and my face a smaller one, like that. So let's start with what are micronutrients. Well, there are different kinds of them, and they're opposed to the macronutrients or macros. And the macros are the protein, carbs, and fats, and the micros are the vitamins and minerals, as well as some of the phytonutrients and these other kind of compounds inside, mostly like plant foods. And you can almost think that the vitamins and minerals are almost like the roots to your health, because they govern virtually all these different processes inside the body, like bone formation, energy production, cognition, digestion, sleep, immunity, insulin sensitivity, inflammation, antioxidant defense, and everything. Is kind of rooted in vitamins and minerals. So even let's go into a very detailed example, which you don't have to remember. You don't have to understand this picture, but it's just an example of how vitamins and minerals are involved with the most fundamental thing in life, which is energy production. So without energy, without ATP, you wouldn't be alive. And the vitamins and minerals are involved with all steps of generating energy inside a mitochondrial transport chain. And inside the mitochondria, the electron transport chain consists of multiple complexes, and you can see different vitamins and minerals are just involved with all these complexes, as well as generating energy from different fuel sources like amino acids, fatty acids, and the glucose. You can see the red ones are the minerals that they're involved in these pathways. So these pathways, for example, beta oxidation, burning fat, is dependent on different minerals: zinc, chromium, magnesium, as well as calcium. And the pathway of glycolysis, which is using carbohydrates for energy, is dependent on zinc, magnesium, chromium, calcium, manganese as well. And amino acids are dependent a lot on manganese, as well as you can just eventually going to go into the TCA cycle or the Krebs cycle, which then enters the electron transport chain. And the last step of energy production is ATP synthase, where the ATP itself comes out. That is also dependent on magnesium and the calcium mostly. So if you were to be deficient in some of these minerals, then your energy production would be suboptimal, or your insulin sensitivity would be suboptimal, your fat oxidation would be suboptimal, and eventually, after a while, your body will start to show some signs of these deficiencies, and maybe you have some poor health outcomes from that as well. Another more, let's say, easier to understand example comes from anthropology. So Weston A. Price was this dentist who went to these Aboriginal tribes to see why these children have really perfect teeth and perfect jawlines and facial features compared to the Western children who had tooth decay and different crooked teeth and those kind of things. And he came to the conclusion that it had to do with the content of their diet. So these Aboriginal people, they consumed a diet high in a lot of these fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, and those are very crucial for the development of the face and the jawline and the teeth and the bones. So the Western children just ate the diet that didn't have these essential nutrients, and that's why also their physical development was suboptimal as a result of that. Another example would be just the production of glutathione. So glutathione is the body's master antioxidant, and it's very important. The main building blocks of glutathione are cysteine, glycine, and glutamate amino acids, but it's also these conversions of these amino acids into glutathione are also dependent on these minerals: magnesium, selenium, zinc, and then the recycling of glutathione is also dependent on different minerals in different parts of the cycle. And last example is melatonin, the sleep hormone. So tryptophan is one of the first building blocks of melatonin tryptophan get converted into 5-HTP, then serotonin, and eventually melatonin. But these conversion pathways are also depend on minerals: calcium, magnesium, iron, zinc, magnesium, and zinc. So what are the minerals that your body needs? So there are 17 essential minerals, and 7 of them are considered macrominerals. They're calcium chloride, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, sodium, and sulfur. Then there's 10 trace minerals: chromium, cobalt, copper, fluoride, iodine, iron, manganese, molybdenum, selenium, and zinc. And 5 possibly essential trace minerals: boron, lithium, nickel, silicon, and vanadium. These are, they're not considered absolutely essential, but they still may have like some beneficial roles in the bodies. It's just that the like World Health Organization hasn't established an RDA for these minerals, and that's why they're considered like possibly essential. So what are the top 10 mineral deficiencies? There's a lot of them. a lot of people may be deficient in some minerals or the other. One of the biggest ones is actually boron. So that the people who get suboptimal intakes of boron, there's over 75% of them. Manganese is also about 75%. Magnesium, 50 to 68%. Chromium, 56%. Calcium, 44 to 73%. Zinc, 42 to 47%. Iron, 25 to 34%. Copper, 25 to 31%. Selenium, 15 to 40%. And molybdenum, 15%. Obviously, it's a very depends on the location and depends on the diet, what the person is following. But the average person, not the biohacker person, but like the average person tends to have these kinds of deficiencies. So yeah, like a boron is actually, it's not because boron is considered like a possibly essential mineral, then the deficiencies of boron aren't that like visible that easily. Like boron is, we'll talk about what it does shortly, but yeah, it's just because, some people may not be clinically deficient in something, it doesn't mean that they couldn't benefit from getting more of it. So it's more of like a suboptimal intake. Most people aren't getting enough of those minerals.
Siim, I'm not sure, maybe you will talk about it a little bit later, but I have a question about these deficiencies. Is that possible? And do you actually see these numbers that we actually don't lack these minerals, but they are not bioavailable in our bodies? Like, for instance, iron, we have plenty of iron in our system, but it's just not being utilized properly. So can you address this one?
Yeah, like the reason why people may develop these symptoms of deficiencies doesn't always have to do with the diet. Yeah, like they may be getting adequate enough of the nutrient, but let's say that the body retains less because of several factors. Like it could be chronic stress. It could also be insulin resistance. So if you are insulin resistant, then you aren't able to shuttle the nutrients into the cells. Hyperglycemia or diabetes also makes you burn through some of these nutrients faster. Some foods may chelate some minerals, like a lot of fibers and plants can chelate iron as well as zinc in significant amounts. So yeah, it's several reasons for that, why people may not be getting adequate amounts. Like a leaky gut or poor digestive enzymes or low stomach acid also means that you're not absorbing the foods that easily, and you're kind of not digesting them completely. So yeah, many reasons why it happens.
And probably also because some of these minerals work hand in hand with other ones. Like it's always like proportions of one to another. So if one mineral is too high, doesn't mean it's going to be absorbed enough, because the other one that plays a huge role is not sufficient. So there's this kind of harmony between those.
Yeah, for sure. Like let's say, for example, zinc. If you're getting too much zinc, then you will reduce copper absorption. So just by reducing your zinc intake, you could boost your copper status as well. And let's say iron, you may be getting adequate amount of iron, but if you don't have enough copper, then you're not going to be able to, let's say, store it that easily, and you won't be able to convert the iron into hemoglobin and red blood cells. So yeah, all these minerals do work in harmony, almost, that they do require each other, and some of them can also be counteractive against one another. Good. Let's carry on. The problem is also one of the reasons why people may be deficient is that the food itself has become lower in a lot of these minerals over time. So since 1840, the amount of minerals in our food has decreased by approximately 30 or 33%. And the reason for that has to do with mostly just agriculture, soil erosion, pesticides, herbicides, all these kind of things that deplete the soil from the nutrients. And as a result of that, the plants themselves also have less food in it. And, the animals also eat poor mineral plants, then the animals themselves will also have slightly less nutrients in them. So that's a kind of a big, a problem in a lot of regions. And it's definitely something that could be avoided with just more careful agricultural practices. It's just people need to kind of start to realize what's happening and pay more attention to that. Let's start with one of the essential nutrients or essential minerals. It's sulfur. So sulfur is quite important. It has many roles. It's involved in methylation, protein synthesis. It has neuroprotective effects, immune system effects, and involved in antioxidant defenses like glutathione. But one of the main functions is also creating cholesterol sulfate from basically sunlight exposure and cholesterol in your bloodstream. So that will have a beneficial effect on the steroid hormones and creating vitamin D3, the kind of active form of D3, which then has, obviously a lot of these immune system benefits and also protects against glycation and prevents against calcium overload. Cholesterol sulfate is also important for membrane stabilization, so protecting against oxidative stress and just general inflammation. So this is the kind of the picture example of that. So if you have adequate sulfur status, you have adequate sulfur intake from foods that contain sulfur, like cruciferous vegetables, eggs, meat, and these allium vegetables or garlic and onions. Those are the main sulfur foods. Then you'll be able to produce enough cholesterol sulfate, and then you have also vitamin D3 sulfate, which once upon exposure to UV radiation and sunlight, then you will have these anticoagulation effects, tissue oxygenation effects, platelet adherence, protection against the glycation. And the sulfur itself also has, it's going to boost your glutathione levels, which protects against the UV radiation side. So you will avoid sunburns and you will avoid the oxidative stress that may come from just excess UV radiation or excess sunlight. So you get the benefits of the vitamin D3 without the harm, basically, if you have adequate sulfur intake. Next up is going to be boron, so one of the main deficiencies. So boron is also very interesting because it's not considered essential, but I think it should be, at least it should be like, more important, more relevant than currently thought to be, because boron is involved also in the antioxidant defenses, and by improving vitamin D status, it also has a lot of these anti-arthritis effects. So it helps to form bones, helps to maintain bone density, helps to improve it and strengthen it. And it also has a positive effect on the sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen by reducing sex hormone binding globulin. So this SHBG, it binds to free testosterone and it can lower your testosterone levels. So with boron, with adequate boron intake, you lower this SHBG, which then frees up the kind of testosterone. How much boron would you need? So the World Health Organization says that anything above 1 milligrams is good enough. And most of these regions across the world also eat approximately like 1 to 2 milligrams a day. What we think with Dr. James as well is that about 3 milligrams is the optimal dose per day. And the kind of tolerable upper limit is 20 to 28 milligrams, which is very hard to reach. So yeah, 3 milligrams is probably like a good dose for boron to aim for. And there are not a lot of boron foods in terms of foods that have a significant amount of boron. Usually it comes from just like the plant foods, because the boron is a part of the cell wall of the plant. And the best foods for boron is actually dried prunes. You can cover your daily boron intake with just a few of these dried prunes already, because they're super high in that. Other foods are the kidney beans, raisins, maybe like other dried fruit. Can also be that avocados, lentils, and black currants. You could also get boron probably from if you eat like bones, like you grind up the bones or these kinds of bone broth things. But yeah, the amount, or let's say most people wouldn't do that, and the amount can also be, varies between that. You probably won't get enough boron if you drink bone broth, but if you actually chew the bones, then you probably may get some good amounts. Let's move on with calcium. So calcium is an essential mineral, and most people think that it's involved with bone density, which is true. It does help with the bones and preventing arthritis and osteoporosis, those kind of things. But it also does, what it also does is that it regulates heartbeat, regulates parathyroid hormone. It actually helps to break down fat and lowers the amount of fat you absorb from food, as well as lead. So people who eat more calcium or more dairy, then in studies, those people tend to be slightly leaner, and they have less body weight because of the, or hypothetically because the dairy, as well as the calcium, lowers the fat absorption. So you get less calories in total from the food that you eat because of this effect. Calcium is also important for the blood pressure and calcification. So to say, like excess calcium is going to be harmful, but you want to strike a good balance between getting enough calcium for the bones, but not in excess to prevent heart disease. And it also helps with sleep. Like REM sleep is dependent of calcium to a certain extent. And for females, it helps to reduce PMS symptoms, apparently in studies. Calcium overload is a possible, very kind of dangerous thing that could happen if you have high calcium supplementation, you have high phosphate intake, and low magnesium intake. So these are the kind of criteria for causing calcium overload. And this would cause atherosclerosis, myocardial injury, cell death, strokes, arrhythmia, hypertension, and eventually cardiovascular disease. So you don't want to get too much calcium. The optimal intake for calcium is somewhere between 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams. This is where you see all the benefits of weight loss and bone density. If you get less than that, then you increase your risk of mostly arthritis and osteoporosis. If you have too much of that, above 1,500, then you will see like slight increased atherosclerosis and calcification. So somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 milligrams is some of the sweet spot. Interestingly, like this excess tends to apply more for the calcium supplementation. So if you're supplementing calcium, then you will see this increased risk for these kind of things. If you're eating calcium from whole foods, then you could even get more than that. You could even get like 2,000 milligrams. And at least in studies, there isn't no association of natural calcium intake with these risks. So you could eat, calcium from food in quite large amounts, but the supplementation has actually like a lower threshold where it becomes somewhat dangerous. So what are the top calcium foods? Dairy is obviously the most abundant source of calcium. And yogurt, milk, mozzarella, maybe cottage cheese and curds and yogurts, different kinds of things. Kefir, those are the highest source of calcium. Cheeses are also good for that. And other sources are like fishes that have the bones, like sardines. If you eat the bones of the sardines, then you get a good amount of calcium from that as well. And the same applies to salmon. Theoretically, it will also apply to the bones of animals. So if you chew on the bones, again, you're going to get some calcium from that as well. There aren't a lot of like plant-based foods that have a lot of calcium, although like kale and spinach do have a small amount. It's probably not going to be a significant amount to get that. So yeah, unless you're eating dairy, then it's pretty hard to actually get like the good high amount of calcium. Whether or not you need a super high intake of calcium depends on like risk factors. If you have a genetics for osteoporosis, or you're female, especially postmenopausal, then you may need to focus more on the dairy to get the calcium intake, or the sardines or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I'd like to add one more aspect to the absorption of different minerals. In this particular case about the calcium and this known phenomena of calcium strengthening the bones. And what is I assume you will say yes to that, but maybe you can comment a little bit more in extension about adding some physical exercises. We actually quite know that impacting bones with some pressure, some hits, and boxing or sprinting or so, will make bones also more dense. And it obviously happens in combination with calcium, so making it more bioavailable. And at the same time, also we know that calcium is a very important mineral for signaling in the brain between astrocytes. These are the star-like cells, and calcium is one of the main signals that is going on there. So, and we also know that when you do physical exercises, particularly those making pressure on the bones, through the hormone of osteocalcin, makes astrocytes more active. So maybe it's a little bit too complicated, but in general, would you comment on adding some additional aspects to absorption of
Right.
mineral?
For sure, yeah. Like you, like just eating calcium may not be enough for sure, like to prevent osteoporosis completely. And exercise also has a positive effect on doing that. The other, like there are like a few things that are associated with a good bone density later in life. That would be like calcium intake, that would be exercise, vitamin D, and maybe like vitamin K status as well. So those are the kind of good minerals and nutrients to focus on. The vitamins, especially like the vitamin D and K2 are also relevant for that, because the K2 will just help to direct the calcium into the bones as well. So yeah, you do want to pay attention to that. I think that the exercise can be a more potent, let's say, stimulus for bone formation or bone density formation than calcium alone. But then like if you still have like a very chronically low intake of calcium, but you're exercising, then you're not like compensating for that. So you still need to get like some calcium from the diet as well to actually have like the building blocks for making bones stronger. Good. And lastly, like mineral waters are also a good source of calcium if you're not eating dairy, like different kinds of mineral waters that have calcium. Calcium needs to be taken in the right ratio with magnesium, because if you're getting too much calcium and not enough magnesium, then you get calcium overload, and that increases risk of calcification and diabetes. So the ratio is less than 3. That will be a good ratio. So if you're getting calcium 3 times more than magnesium, then that's going to be a problem. And the optimal ratio is somewhere between 2 to 1. So the RDA for calcium would be like 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams, and the RDA for magnesium is like 400 to 500 milligrams, somewhere between that. So kind of the good ratio 2 to 1 is good. 3 to 1 is still fine, but the 5 to 1 that the US today has can be for sure bad for the calcification. And usually it's not that the people aren't eating enough, or that people are eating too much calcium. It's just that people may not be eating enough magnesium. So you need to still make sure that you eat the magnesium as well, especially if you're eating a high intake of calcium. Next up is going to be chromium. So I think most people don't really know what chromium does, but those who do know, then it is usually associated with blood sugar management. And it is true that it helps with lowering blood sugar and improving insulin sensitivity, but it also has like some other benefits, like it reduces cholesterol, raises HDL, lowers triglycerides. In some studies, it helps to improve body composition through the same mechanisms, through insulin sensitivity and things. But it's also involved actually some of these antioxidant defenses like superoxide dismutase, glutathione, and DNA enzymes. So the way chromium works is by enhancing the activity of the insulin receptor. So let's say a hypothetical scenario where you don't have any, like, let's say, adequate chromium intake, and you're insulin resistant, which is the worst case scenario, you're insulin resistant and no chromium, then the insulin won't be able to bind to the insulin receptor on the cell. And as a result of that, the glucose channels remain shut and your blood sugar levels would stay elevated for longer because there's no insulin to open the glucose channels. If you aren't insulin resistant, you have still some insulin production, but you don't have a chromium, then the insulin will bind to the insulin receptor and it will open the glucose channel to a certain extent, so some of the blood glucose will get in, but it's not fully maximized. Whereas the last scenario is that you have chromium intake as well, then chromium will bind to this chromodulin, which then enhances the activation of the insulin receptor or the activity of the insulin receptor. So insulin will bind to that and opens the glucose channel much more, and a lot of more of these glucose will enter the cell and your blood sugar levels will be lower compared to if you had no chromium. So what the chromium just does is it kind of enhances insulin sensitivity and enhances the ability for your body to clear the bloodstream from glucose. Where do you get chromium? You get chromium from mussels, oysters, lobster, shrimp, so like seafood. And the only kind of plant foods that have it in smaller amounts are broccoli and oats. So still mostly like from animal foods and seafood is where you get chromium from. Next up, we talk about copper. So this is where the kind of relationship between two minerals is a good example. So copper and iron work very well, or they have to be, basically balanced. So copper helps with iron absorption. It helps to release stored iron. It helps to uptake and utilize iron, as well as produce hemoglobin, which is the oxygenated version of iron that helps to basically oxygenate the body and red blood cells. So without copper, you may not be able to do that. And a lot of the times, the issue isn't that you're not getting enough iron. The issue may be that you're not getting enough copper when it comes to anemia and oxygenation of the body or low hemoglobin status. So yeah, you actually need to focus on getting copper instead of iron. And the RDA for copper is about like 0.9 to 1.3 milligrams, but the optimal intake is somewhere between like 3 milligrams. And that is, something like a slightly higher copper intake is going to be more beneficial because most people are eating still quite high amounts of iron because it's like fortified in almost all foods. And if you have been suffering from some signs of anemia or you've been low in copper for a long time, then the kind of deprivation recovery strategy or the dose would be somewhere like 3 to 6 milligrams a day, which means that you just need to eat a lot more liver and some other copper foods like oysters, beans and lentils, buckwheat, and dark chocolate are the kind of top high copper foods. Liver is the absolute highest. So as you can see, just the 3 ounces or 85 grams has 12 milligrams of copper. It's also high in iron, but it's kind of very well balanced with the copper. Whereas with the red meat, it has a significantly higher amount of iron compared to copper. So if you're eating only red meat, or let's say only muscle meat and not the organs, then you may not get adequate amounts of copper, and you're getting too much iron. Moving on with iodine. Yeah.
Well, a short question. I'm not sure if you know the guy named Morley Robbins, and he's a guy who really emphasizes the importance of the copper, and he basically says that since the Big Bang, there is almost I think the third element that is in excess in general in cosmos and on Earth is the iron. So basically, it's never the problem of iron in general, but it's usually that the iron in combination with copper is the problem. And basically, and now the question is to you. This Robbins says that basically the reason people age and get sick is too much oxidation of iron. What do you think about that?
Well, like excess iron is associated with heart disease and liver damage, and I do think that like excess iron would cause oxidative stress to the body because it's it's iron and it becomes to rust with exposure to oxidation. So I think it's certainly very important. Like maybe like aging of the skin, like physical aging for sure can be traced to excess iron in some sense, like just the body experiences more oxidative stress. And if you are like full of iron, then any kind of oxidative stress would make the iron also more reactive or oxidized. So like how true it is, it's hard to tell, but it certainly is an important factor for sure. Like excess iron would may increase the risk of atherosclerosis and heart disease, no doubt about it. All right, iodine. Let's move on with iodine. So people associate iodine with the thyroid hormones, which is true. The iodine is involved with that, but as a mineral, it's also involved with antioxidant defense. It's especially important for the brain function and development, intelligence, memory, brain health, as well as the immune system and metabolic rate. They very much require iodine. And one interesting thing about this, the iodine also protects against the oxidation of these polyunsaturated fatty acids. So if you're eating seafood, then the iodine content in itself in that can help to counteract some of the potential oxidation that may occur if you're like heating it up too much. So that's why the kind of natural whole foods that has high iodine is still kind of comes with the full package, so to say. So if you're eating like farmed seafood, then they may not have the iodine because of not eating it from their diet. And as a result of that, they also are more predisposed to getting oxidized, the omega-3s in the fish, farmed fish, for example. So the way iodine works in the thyroid, at least, is through in conjunction or together with the other minerals as well again. So to get the iodine into the thyroid cell in the first place, then you need magnesium and sodium. So there's this NIS, which is the sodium iodine importer that transports iodine into the thyroid cell. So if you are low in sodium or low in magnesium, then the iodine isn't going to get into the thyroid cell in the first place. And once inside, then the creation of T3 and T4, which are the thyroid hormones, requires a selenium as well. So you need salt and selenium to produce thyroid hormones at the end of the day. And the recycling of iodine is also requires a selenium. So it's kind of goes to show again that it's not just one mineral. It can also be like the other minerals are involved there. How much iodine should you get? The RDA for iodine is like 150 micrograms. Pregnant women may need more, 250. The safe upper limit is estimated to be 1,000 micrograms, but the average Japanese person can eat up to like 3,000 or even 10,000 micrograms a day, and they don't have any no bad health outcomes from that. They don't get any thyroiditis, they don't get any other problems with the thyroid, no autoimmunity, probably because they're getting that iodine from whole foods. So they're eating a lot of the sea vegetables and seafood in general that has iodine, compared to taking iodine as a supplement. So if you're taking iodine as a supplement, then the safe upper limit could be 1,000 micrograms, after which you start to see like thyroid damage and thyroiditis and autoimmunity, those kind of things. But if you're getting even like a huge amount of iodine from seafood or the other foods that have iodine, then apparently, again, like the whole foods, for some reason, bypasses this safe upper limit, and it's kind of safe. Where do you get iodine? Like I said, seafood, sea vegetables, nori, kelp, wakame, and whichever you prefer, fish, lobster, oysters, as well as the yogurt and dairy. So there's like the Swiss people, they don't have access to a lot of seafood. At least like ancestrally they didn't, and they ate only like these dairy foods, cheeses and yogurts, but they still didn't have any like low thyroid, or they didn't have like iodine deficiency. So they got the iodine from the milk or the dairy, which is fortunate. Next up, we talk about magnesium. So magnesium is associated with stress, sleep, and relaxation, but magnesium is kind of the master mineral involved with basically every function in the body: ATP production, DNA synthesis, neurotransmitters, electrolytes, inflammation, immune system, anticoagulation, antioxidant defense, heart function, blood pressure, atherosclerosis, insulin sensitivity, thyroid hormones, testosterone, fat oxidation. So yeah, like there isn't anything that magnesium doesn't do almost. And yeah, it's a very huge mineral for everything. An example again, magnesium activates ATP in addition to basically being that involved in the ATP synthase. Magnesium deficiency will eventually cause many problems, like it increases inflammation, oxidative stress, endothelial dysfunction, and metabolic syndrome. You will also experience sodium and calcium overload, which will then cause things like arrhythmias, thrombosis, high blood pressure, strokes, and then cardiovascular disease. So yeah, just a very important mineral for that. How much magnesium do you need? The RDA is like 350 to 420 milligrams, but optimally you may need somewhere between like 400 to 600, depending on the person. Yeah, that's gonna be to maybe like make up for the magnesium deficiency, or to actually have an additional beneficial effect on some of the disease states. Like if you already have high blood pressure, then you may need to in the short term increase your magnesium intake a little bit to compensate for that. You may, and the safe limit for magnesium is also like pretty high. Like you could get 1,000 milligrams and probably nothing bad's gonna happen. You may get like diarrhea if you overdo it, and that can also be like a sign of that you're getting adequate amounts of magnesium. But yeah, it's a pretty safe supplement or a mineral. The top magnesium foods are pumpkin seeds, almonds, spinach, black beans, potatoes, and salmon. So they're not like super high in magnesium, and they're not like a very commonly eaten foods either, which is why magnesium can be such a common deficiency. And it's also something that people could supplement just because of that, because of not getting enough of that from whole foods. So it's also basically one of the few minerals that you could supplement, just to be like on the safe side. It's gonna be manganese. So it's a very less known mineral, but it's still important, mostly because of being a part of this manganese peroxide dismutase, which is one of the antioxidant defense systems that protects against oxidative stress and free radicals. It's also involved with regulating the endocrine system and metabolism, and synthesizes different kinds of enzymes, proteins, and hematopoiesis is a catalyzation. Hematopoiesis catalyzation requires manganese as well, which is a creation of these red blood cells and immune system function as well. Where do you get manganese? It's a pretty easy to get adequate amounts of manganese, so it's not very like, let's say, impossible. You get it from mussels, hazelnuts, brown rice, oysters, chickpeas, and pineapple. Some good foods, and it's not very hard to reach the adequate intake. Top molybdenum foods. Molybdenum is very similar to manganese, but it's mostly involved with digesting protein or detoxifying nitrogen and urea. So you still want to get adequate amounts, but it's not, again, like a very hard to get mineral. You can get it from black-eyed peas, liver, lima beans, yogurt, potatoes, and banana, and the kind of RDA itself isn't crazy high to not reach. Next up is going to be potassium. Potassium is associated with blood pressure and heart function, but it's also involved with some aspects of antioxidant defense, helps to reduce atherosclerosis, lowers water retention, increases vasodilation, reduces inflammation, increases insulin sensitivity, also ATP production, helps with carbohydrate metabolism, and gluconeogenesis as well. Potassium needs to be obtained in the right ratio with sodium. So the optimal ratio for potassium and sodium is 0.8 to 1.7, and that depends a lot on the amount of sodium you're getting, because the RDA for potassium is somewhere between like 4,700 milligrams is the RDA. So between like 4,000 to 6,000 is the lowest risk for high blood pressure and atherosclerosis if you're getting that amount of potassium. And with sodium, the sodium intake, it's not necessarily that high sodium is bad. It's more like that too much sodium in relation to too little potassium is the one that is causing the high blood pressure and other problems. So if your potassium is low, then 3,500 milligrams of sodium can be harmful. But if you're getting 4,000 to 6,000 milligrams of potassium, then 3,500 milligrams of sodium is not going to be an issue either. The RDA for sodium is like 2,200 milligrams. But you don't need to be that low if you're like exercising and sweating and you're still generally healthy, as long as you're getting a high intake of potassium as well. The modern diet tends to be, processed and refined, which is why the sodium content is super high and the potassium content is much lower. Where do you get potassium? The top foods are potatoes, dehydrated carrots, regular carrots, dried apricots, Swiss chard, acorn squash, lentils. So these kind of plant foods generally are higher in potassium. And potatoes are actually the best one, in my opinion. Like one medium potato can give you like 1,000 milligrams of potassium. So if you eat only like 4 potatoes, then you can cover your daily potassium already. Selenium, it's mostly associated with immunity, but as you found out, it also regulates the thyroid, provides antioxidant defense, lowers oxidative stress, protects the thyroid against oxidative stress, protects the heart against oxidative stress, lowers stroke risk, prevents lipid oxidation, prevents LDL oxidation, protects the brain because of its antioxidant capacities, and helps also detoxify heavy metals. For example, like, so seafood may have like more of these heavy metals, but it also has high selenium. So if you're eating like wild seafood, then the theoretically, like this, the iodine content and the selenium content helps to detoxify it to a certain extent. How much selenium should you get? The RDA is only 55 micrograms. The upper limit is 400 to 800 micrograms, but the optimal amount should be between like 200 to 400 micrograms per day. Where do you get selenium? The biggest source of selenium is Brazil nuts, so you can cover your daily selenium with just a few Brazil nuts. Other foods also: kidneys, tuna, crab, halibut, sardines, so mostly like seafood, and animal foods are still higher in selenium. I don't really know like any plant-based selenium sources, maybe like some nuts, but they're probably not as high as animal foods. Moving on with zinc. So zinc, also important for immunity. The RDA is between like 9 to 13 milligrams. The upper limit should be, or let's say if you want to be fully optimized, if you have like a low immune system or you've been sick, then you may actually need to get like a bit more, like 20 to 40 milligrams. But chronically high intake of zinc can also be, negative because of reducing copper absorption and raising cholesterol as well. Like excess zinc and low copper would also raise your cholesterol levels. So somewhere between like 10 to 20, I think, is a good safe amount on a daily basis. Where do you get zinc? The top foods are oysters, red meat, crab, liver, buckwheat, wheat germ, and those kind of foods. Seafood, again, can be high, as well as muscle meat is super high. So if you're eating a lot of muscle meat and not enough organs, then again, you're not getting enough copper and you're getting too much iron as well as too much zinc if you're only eating muscle meat, which is why you need to kind of counterbalance the muscle meat with some organs like liver or kidneys. Let's also talk about losing minerals. So you do lose minerals through sweat quite easily. The biggest loss comes from sodium or salt. So sodium and chloride, about a half teaspoon of salt you lose per 1 hour of exercise. And that can also apply to saunas. So let's take a 30-minute sauna session, then you would lose half of that, so like a quarter teaspoon of salt. It's very easy to replenish that, just drinking like maybe mineral water or salt your food a bit more. So you don't really need to take like a specific supplement to replenish the salt. When it comes to iodine and chromium and copper, then those foods you do also lose in quite significant amounts through sweat. So as you remember, the RDA, or the recommended intake for copper, is like 3 milligrams. So you can lose almost like a half of your copper if you sweat for 1 hour. Iodine, the RDA for iodine is also 150, so 1/3 of your iodine can be lost. And a chromium RDA is between, again, like 40 14 or something around there. So you can also lose like half of your chromium if you sweat too much. So for these foods or these minerals, you could like just eat more liver, eat more seafood, eat more mussels, or I wouldn't like supplement copper. Even then, I wouldn't supplement iodine either. But you could supplement chromium if you've been sweating a lot or exercising a lot. And then there's going to be magnesium, potassium, zinc, and selenium, and calcium and iron. So these minerals, you do lose them, but they're so small amounts that they don't really matter. That you can just replenish them with food. The magnesium, 8 to 10 milligrams, is so small. 140 milligrams of potassium is also small. So yeah, just eat like a good diet, and you'll get them back. Let's talk about salt then. So yeah, salt is associated with mostly hydration and electrolytes, as well as raising blood pressure. Yeah.
So just one question about how to lose, or why we lose, or how we lose these minerals, and because there's a quite a huge community of fasters, people who fast. And as you also written a book about autophagy, and you probably are one of the definitely in the Nordic region, one of the experts on fasting. So how about losing minerals by excreting through urine? When you fast, probably people noticed, especially extended fast, you lose a lot of urine, and therefore also probably a lot of minerals, which leads many people to feeling quite bad when they fast. So could you short comment on that?
Yeah. I think, well, through the urine, you would lose mostly electrolytes and maybe some other minerals as well. But the biggest loss is still going to come from salt again, and salt, potassium, and magnesium, maybe chloride. But I don't think that you could lose like a significant amount of like zinc or selenium through urine. I think, I think the biggest loss is going to come from salt. And to replenish that, you can just drink a little bit more mineral water, or just the regular salted water can also do the trick for that. If it's like only like a 2-day fast or something like that, 3-day fast, then you don't really need to worry about the potassium or the magnesium. You could take like a magnesium supplement, it wouldn't hurt. But yeah, you're even if you were to be low in, you're not going to be losing like that much minerals through only like a 3-day fast, as long as you're eating like a good diet. If before the fast you've been eating a bad diet, low in minerals, then it could be problematic, but not in most cases. All right, so salt is associated with high blood pressure, but I said, like I said, it's also related to potassium, and other, even like insulin affects that. Regardless, the salt has other roles specifically for the stomach acid. So your stomach acid is made of salt and water. So if you have low stomach acid, then you won't be able to absorb the food nutrients either, and you won't get the minerals. So you need to have like good stomach acid, and salt helps with that. Salt also helps to have a positive effect on the immune system through the same stomach acid. So it helps to break down different kinds of pathogens and bacteria. Salt is important for the thyroid hormones, insulin sensitivity. Like low salt diets cause insulin resistance, improve sleep, helps with neurotransmitters, helps lower cholesterol, increases HDL, reduces stress hormones. Obviously very important for exercise and energy production. So yeah, salt is still an essential nutrient, like sodium and the chloride are essential nutrients. When it comes to waters, then they are also like a good source of minerals and any kind of other metals. The beneficial ones are calcium, magnesium, sodium, silicon, iodine, chromium, sulfate, lithium, and copper, including some others that you could get from mineral waters or spring waters. And the harmful ones that can come from some sources are lead, aluminum, arsenic, mercury, cadmium, excess copper, excess fluoride, excess lithium, and excess sulfate. Those can be problematic. So, if you want to be fully aware of what you drink, then you need to kind of test your tap or test your well or whichever water you get. And yeah, but the mineral waters are still a good source of calcium, at least, and magnesium and sodium as well. So how do you prevent the nutrient deficiencies? So like I said earlier, you need to fix your insulin resistance because without insulin you can't shuttle the nutrients into the cell. You need to eat the nutrient-dense food, nutrient-dense diet that involves, some maybe organ meats and seafood, and maybe dairy. You can drink mineral waters because the absorption of minerals is much higher from water than from food. You need to supplement some of the deficiencies that you may have. The most common ones, again, like boron, magnesium, maybe zinc in some cases. So you need to figure out which one are the deficiencies and then supplement them, and also avoid this diabetes or hyperglycemia and excess stress that can also deplete the body from these minerals and the vitamins. But that's it. That's my presentation. And thanks for listening.
Well, Siim, thanks. Quite a nice overview on the topic. Really pleasure to hear you speak about that, and hopefully everybody will understand, because I definitely will have to translate it also with the subtitles afterwards.
Okay.
Anyway, I have one related question to the RDAs that you mentioned several times. Can you comment on that? Because we see that all the recommended doses from your side, and usually we know that these RDAs are on the safe side, so to be sure that nothing's going to happen. So, can we say, as a general rule of thumb, that RDAs had to be left, aside, and you have to actually pay attention more to the increased doses, rather than written on the labels of supplements, for instance?
Well, most of the RDAs are pretty accurate. It's just that some people may need more because of their poor absorption or their insulin resistance, or they're deficient. So the most accurate way to know would be to just measure your blood and look at what the specific minerals look like for you. So if you are already good, if your red blood cell magnesium count is good, then you don't need to take large amounts of magnesium supplement all the time. You can skip it. But if it's low, then obviously you could in the short term boost it up a lot, so to say.
Okay. And definitely, this is going to be probably a huge topic, so we are not going very deep into that. But in general, you probably also noticed that there are many supplement forms that are useless, and some that are quite good. So, also the same about the magnesium, right? So there are many things that you can buy in the drugstore that are useless, but there are many producers that make some forms that are more bioavailable. So maybe short comment on how you actually yourself approach all the supplements to decide and to actually understand whether these are just expensive pills that do nothing and actually work.
The most available ones or most effective ones are like the liposomal supplements. So those are much more easily bioavailable than regular pills. Maybe like tinctures as well. Liquid forms tend to do better. So liquid drops can be a more bioavailable than pills and capsules. I don't. Usually the doses on those supplements can be much higher than you actually need. So even if they are, let's say, worse in the bioavailability, then you compensate for that with a higher intake, so to say. So you still absorb them, even if your absorption rate is lower, than just because you're getting 3 times the more than you need, then that would counterbalance that. So I don't think that you need to particularly be super concerned with that. But if you are, then the kind of liposomal versions, the tinctures, the liquid forms tend to be a bit better.
Okay. And as we probably have seen, that there are many biohackers that drink 50 pills every day, like they're totally obsessed with different kind of supplements. But for me, you seem to be a guy that tends to get most of the micronutrients from the food. So how is it really? Do you take a lot of supplements, or do you really prefer food, natural forms of these things?
I do take quite a lot of supplements. I don't take like a lot of nutrients in terms of that. Like I don't take a lot of vitamin supplements, but I do take a lot of different kinds of supplements besides that. That have a different function for that. Like maybe like NMN sometimes that has a different function than vitamins and minerals. I do take like vitamin D3 regularly, K2, some magnesium sometimes, maybe like some other like herbs or like astragalus or something, that like a herb supplement that helps other things like cholesterol and things, or lipids. Yeah, so yeah, I do take a lot. I don't know like how much, maybe like for sure like 10 at least every day.
Okay, I see. Yeah, and then the final question, since you have written so many books, you can actually mention all of those here. Everything we started with keto, bodybuilding approaches to diets, everything like that. You have written a book about the immunity and about autophagy, and now this mineral fix. So, what prompted you to write this book, and how come you found your interest in minerals?
Well, they found me in some way because Dr. James, my co-author, he proposed the idea to write the book about minerals because he has written a book about salt before, and a lot of his followers asked to get like a book on minerals as well as a follow-up. So we wrote the immunity fix before, and the next step was going to be the mineral fix. So that's how I got into minerals, and I do now realize like the importance of that, and I learned a lot through the process of writing the book. So yeah, now I'm like a huge proponent of making sure that you have adequate mineral intake.
I mean, 500 pages, or how many pages in the book? One should learn a lot about minerals here.
Yeah, like the book is maybe like 500 pages of like the content, and there's also like 200 pages of the references after that. So
yeah, cool.
So a lot of references involved.
Yeah, congratulations on that. So if anybody wants to find more about you, it's siimland.com, and people could write an email to you. And also, I noticed that you have a lot of different activities with Finnish guys, with the Biohacker Summit guys. So what's new and what's cool going on in that front?
Well, for this year, nothing. Like, there's not gonna be any events this year. Unfortunately, we just recently had like a retreat in September, which was awesome. We plan to have another retreat in April 2022, and the next summit is gonna be in May in Estonia, in Tallinn Helsinki 2022. Yeah.
Well, yeah, congratulations on the books and on the further plans. So I have to say huge thanks to you for taking time and sharing your insights on minerals. That was awesome, and
Yeah, no problem.
probably will give a lot of insight also to other people. So thank you, Siim, on that.
Yeah, no problem.
So